Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this live session of Animation Assemble. My name is Beth Parker. I am a freelance executive producer and a production consultant. I'm also co-chair of Animated Women here in the UK. We look after, support women in the animation and VFX sectors. The session today is sponsored by Animation UK, who have helped set the agenda for what we'll discuss today, and they are represented on the panel by their executive chair and director, Kate O'Connor. Today's event has also been produced by Shannon Reeve from Love Love Films down in Bournemouth and exec produced by Tracy Liddell. Thank you to them for all their hard work in pulling this together. Before we move into introducing the session itself, I just want to remind you that we want your questions and observations today. Send them along to us using the heart button in the top right of your screens. So to introduce the session, the pandemic that we're currently experiencing globally has caused unprecedented disruption and concern in virtually every sector across the globe, from education to hospitality, and has halted almost all film and TV production. But animation is one of the few sectors that has been able to remain in production throughout lockdown and is fairly resilient to further disruption. This session, Animation Assemble, then will ask, what are the opportunities the animation industry can grasp today? The panel features a range of panelists from across the industry and will discuss the real issues facing both studios of all sizes and locations as well as commissioners. This is an essential panel for all of the animation sector, and we will dive into questions about sector health. We'll be looking at content, we'll be looking at investment, and we'll be looking at future proofing. To help us have this discussion, we have 5 panelists with us today. We have Camilla Deacon from Lupus Films, we have Alistair Morgan from Aikema Films, Sarah Muller from BBC Children's, Chris Rose from Nickelodeon, Kate O'Connor from Animation UK. Good morning, everybody. We're now going to watch a little show reel from UK Kids Screen. That's a nice little reminder to us this morning as to why we're all here. So thank you to the panelists for joining us this morning. I'd like each and every one of you to give a brief introduction to yourself and just a little thought on the opportunities you see for the animation industry ahead of us today. Kate, let's start with you.
Hi everyone. Thanks, Beth. And just a quick, brief shout out to the hardworking CMC team because so far the conference has been brilliant, really great, raising really important issues. So as you've already said in the introduction, Beth, I'm the exec chair of Animation UK, which is the trade body for animation. I know lots of you have heard of us and worked with us, but just a brief reminder, we've been going for over a decade as a campaigning organisation, but it was just 3 years ago we set up as the formal trade body for animation. We went into partnership with the trade body that represents the visual effects and studios and post-production sector, and we're part of the UK Screen Alliance. And we share lots of issues with those sectors, but we're also really distinct. And hence Animation UK continues under our brand, and we have a fantastic council and group of members who support SHAPE, actually do most of the work. So a big shout out to them. Look, we're here primarily to ensure that the right business context is there for the animation industry. Unashamedly, it's about business, but obviously we care about art and culture as well. And what we've been doing over the last decade, 3 years in my case, is looking at how we can raise investment, how we can get more funding into the system, how we can ensure there are grants and development opportunities. We tackle skills profile, knowledge base, because in the UK, I don't know if it's like this around the world, but there was very little idea about the size and shape of the industry. And in January this year, we produced a manifesto, right? And then COVID came along, the pandemic hit us all. But what I want to just say, and I know I'm going to go on too long, so you can kick me under the table, Beth, or send me a Zoom shock or something. But basically, within nanoseconds, our sector had managed to offsite and, completely change to remote working patterns. And that included stop frame as well. I mean, obviously, our members were lucky maybe in that they were in the build and design stage in some of these areas, but we didn't have a single member who was affected immediately, initially. And that just goes to show, and we've seen it on the show reel, we are a fantastic sector. I mean, without doubt, I think the Cinderella sector of the, excuse the pun, of the screen industries. We're agile, we're resilient, we're innovative, we're creative, we're responsive. So for the whole of the 3 months, Animation UK has been shouting out to the world that sadly for live action, there was complete lockdown. Not for us. We were open for business. We were continuing business. We were continuing in production. And that message, I think, has been received and understood, not just in the UK, but globally. But we can only be open for business. We can be only in production if we're commissioned, funded, supported, recognised for the range of content we can produce and the work that we can do. And sometimes it's disheartening to hear that animation is perceived as taking too long or too expensive, or there's a perceived perception that it's for preschool or younger age groups. It's none of those things. It's none of those things. And it's all of the things I've just mentioned. So I'm hugely optimistic about the opportunities for business, for animation, whatever the World Health Crisis throws at us. But I really have got a challenge there for PSPs and SVODs and new platforms to rethink and reskin the way they see animation and the audiences that we can reach.
Thank you. Thanks, Kate. You get a let for a kick under the table for being so positive.
Thank you.
Chris, what about you? Just quickly, opportunities as from your point of view at Nickelodeon.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks, Beth, and thanks to the CMC for a great week and for inviting me here this morning. Look, we're in interesting but challenging times We probably all felt that leaving the EU was going to be the big burden of the new decade, but instead we're faced with additional new challenges. But in the words of Edward Bono, creativity involves breaking out of established patterns in order to look at things in a different way. I guess we've talked a lot over the years about digital disruption, but now it's time to think about production disruption and the opportunities that will emerge for creators, producers, writers, designers, and animators. We've all learned, experienced, and achieved so much over the last 4 months, but there's so much more to learn and demonstrate as program makers and platform providers. In terms of production continuity, my biggest takeaway is that clear communication is imperative. It's so important that teams communicate regularly and effectively, and I don't mean endless Zoom calls. I think we've actually mastered a new way of having really succinct updates and keeping production flowing. I think we've settled into a great way of working, a different way of working, but one that continues to deliver on our strategic objectives and keep creating great content for kids.
Thanks, Chris. Sarah, what about you?
Well, I have to say both Kate and Chris have very eloquently said just about everything I thought I was going to say, but better. It's very interesting. The BBC Children's Division is multi-genre, so I have been able to observe firsthand how much and the scale that they're dealing with of carnage in the other sectors of the production pipeline. And we have sailed through largely unscathed. The bottle hasn't even stopped spinning yet, is exactly what the consequences are going to be for the different other arms of production within the business. So it is a real opportunity for animation, for sure. It means that everything will turn up when it's meant to turn up. It's largely all delivering on time, on budget. It means that these will be the sole complete deliveries in the next year or so because everyone else has had to reduce production numbers and that kind of thing. It definitely means that the animation will shine because everything will be seen in the way it was originally conceived, if that's a fair thing to say. I would also agree with Chris, particularly about making sure communication works. That's one of the things we've learned from this. If anything, I think we've been talking more than we might have done if we could just assuming that it was business as normal because we've had to think about things in a different way. Communication's got better. So that's my 2 minutes worth, plus what the others said.
Thanks, Sarah. Alistair, what about you?
Thanks, Beth, and hi to everyone who's watching this virtually. I work at Akamar Films, and we produce Bing, the animated series for preschool. But I think it's fair to say that we're much more than a production company. We also produce a lot of digital content from our studios in Camden, and we were fortunate enough to initiate working from home before the government mandated it, and I think that gave us a little bit of a runway to get organised, work out how Zoom works properly, try and minimise the amount of time that our respective children come in and crash the conversations. But I think it's been pretty much business as usual for us. There have been challenges, but it's enabled us to refocus on what's important to us at Akamar, and that's sounds like a cliche, but it's always worth repeating, is around the audiences. And families have been sheltering at home, etc. Routines have been broken, and we've seen an increase in consumption on many of our digital channels. So I think there's a real opportunity there to just refocus on super serving our audience and making sure that if they're at the centre of our conversations, that we'll do a good job when we get back to whatever our new normal is.
Thank you. Camilla, what opportunities have you seen throughout these times for you guys at Lupus?
Well, so Lupus Films has been around for nearly 20 years. We're a kind of medium-sized studio, and like Akamar, we were able to set up home working before the government lockdown, and I think it's worked really well for us. And I think that actually animators and designers and artists are often people who naturally quite like working from home and can flourish under those conditions. So we've been really impressed with the people that we work with who've kind of carried on throughout producing the most beautiful work. But I also think there's been a huge amount of interest, particularly from the streamers in animation, and I think we've had more requests than ever for animation content, whether it's our original projects, our own IP, or developments that we've adapted from book properties, or whether in fact it's that being approached by them to help them develop projects that they've found. And I think that what I'd really like to see from this is a real flowering of opportunity for a kind of wider group of creatives, because I think that where we can see some positivity, not only in the fact that we can continue working under lockdown conditions and that there's a continued interest in animation content, but also, you know, opening up to new voices and using this as a really interesting time to increase the access for new talent to come into the industry and tell their stories.
Thank you, Camilla. Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and I think what I'm hearing from all of you is that it's been quite a positive experience, if anything, lockdown, because we've all been able to sort of move into slightly different ways of working whilst continuing with productions that were started before lockdown. But it's given us the opportunity to kind of think about new ways perhaps of producing, but also new ways of broadcasting. And I kind of want to pick up on that point about formats as well as voices. So Alistair, can I pick up on something you said when we had a conversation earlier in the week about moving more towards non-linear and perhaps kind of thinking about different ways of delivering format to broadcasters and streamers, for example? I mean, there's much more opportunity for non-linear content.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the fact that linear channels remain incredibly important to us and our audiences, and some of our partners are on this panel, and that's still an incredibly important way to connect with our audience. But over the past few years, we found there's an ability to diversify how we reach these audiences. We talk about the linear and the importance of that. But if we're talking as far as reach and numbers and consumption, digital audiences and a lot of the digital platforms via platforms that you subscribe to, SVOD platforms or AVOD platforms, which are free to access, have opened up brand new markets for us. In addition to that, I said earlier that Akamar, we're more than just a production company. You know, we manage app production in-house. In the last week, we've just launched a new app for being in Italian, which we're really excited about. Poland will follow in a couple of weeks' time. And the numbers and the appetite for quality content seems to, well, we don't feel that we've peaked on that yet. You know, we've passed, as an example, 2.1 billion views on YouTube alone. And we only started publishing YouTube content and compilations and bits of the show, I think, in around 2018. So going back to that central point that we have at Akamar around the audiences, the platforms have given extra opportunities for the industry to super serve them. And you need to think about it in a slightly different way. There's a lot more choice. And I think that we need to be more proactive on delivering quality where the audience wants it. And they want it in different formats, different lengths, different times, and on different platforms and different devices. So since we've been in lockdown, we haven't really stopped in the same conversations that we're having. We're looking to expand. We're looking to innovate in new areas. We had some really exciting conversations at the moment around voice content and how that might work with interactive technology. And so we are incredibly excited about continuing to be in as many linear broadcasts as possible. But we're just trying to look 5-10 years ahead to see where the audience is going to be and what their needs are going to be, and make decisions now that help us meet them.
Thank you. What sort of impact is that then going to have on commissioners? I mean, a commissioner is going to have to re-strategize coming out of lockdown, and they're going to have to kind of look at the way people have quite swiftly changed their viewing habits. Can I go to Chris first with this one? You know, are you thinking about new ways of getting content to audiences?
Well, I can tell you that during the lockdown period, as everyone said, productions continued remotely. We had 2 series in production in China when the outbreak started, which have started delivering. An animation pipeline and commissioning is it stretches over a long period. We're in a strong position. We've currently got more animation shows in production than before. I think the animation production timeframe means that, in fact, we've got more flexibility and allows us to pivot easily. So if the demand for short form content or longer content, if there is demand there, then we can pivot and we can deliver that on those requirements. Once we got into our groove, it was more than business as usual. I think over the last little while, we've put quite a lot into development. Certainly in my time at Nickelodeon, we had 11 shows in production, and we were able to keep those going and moving forward without missing any delivery dates. And that was thanks to the ingenuity of the teams around the world and by being agile. I think working remotely and working outside the box and moving to non-traditional ways of producing has really helped change our thinking, particularly in reference to audio recording, for example. We've been able to work with our audio facilities to deliver mic kits to the actors to ensure business continuity, to make sure that we can get those soundtracks delivered to the animation studios. And also, we've worked with partners who have allowed their software licenses to be tailored to home kits. So I think there's a lot of agility in production and in format requirements.
Thank you, Chris. Is there anything you want to add to that on with Sarah? Because I know there's less flexibility perhaps at the BBC.
Yes, so I think what the pandemic has shown us is there's room for every type of platform. We'd already made a point of making sure we diversified across everywhere children were. We want to reach every child. But I just want to put in a slight word of warning and remind everybody that not every child in the UK even has access to broadband, much less can afford subscriptions to paid VOD channels. And I'm always surprised there are quite a lot of kids out there who rely very much on the free-to-air market. And we all know who those channels are. And we have noticed that even though iPlayer numbers have risen exponentially for children's during this period, there's definitely very much still room for that free shop window where you can get the best of our content. And it's just, we all talk about all these moves, but we have to remember that there's quite a lot of children living in poverty and they don't have the access that we just assume that they do. So that's one point. Well, we're on the subject of children. Sorry, I'm turning into the horrible old witch at the feast. Yes, we are managing really well with getting the voices, getting the soundtracks in. It has worked. Every element of what we do has adapted well. But I am hearing that if you've got children in your voice cast, it's not so easy. You're potentially not getting the licenses from the local authorities. It's much harder to coach a parent to work with the equipment that you send out because they're not used to it, and it's harder to direct them as well. So that at the moment we don't have anything actually with a young cast, but I'm told that's an area where you might struggle. So that's just adding that caveat.
Yeah, no, and I think that's
really
yeah.
hard with some kids on their recordings, and I absolutely take your point. It does take longer and it is a little bit harder, but we are able to get those lines delivered to us. Obviously, the quality is not as great as being in a studio on many different levels, but to ensure that we retain kids' voices in our programs, it's a step that we're happy to take.
And can you get the licenses? Because I was told you couldn't get them.
They're working with, in this particular instance, the kids are in the US.
Ah, okay. UK kids.
Yeah.
I appreciate it will be difficult here.
But I think it's fair to note that as an industry on the whole, we've fared really well, and it is also worth noting the things that have been difficult, and that is one of them. But compared to other industries, it's a fairly minor point and can probably be got round in kind of a bit of creative production planning. that's what I've been hearing as well. That that kids' voices has been particularly difficult, but it's not something that has to break a production, perhaps. I'd like to kind of move the conversation on a little bit into content, and actually Camilla mentioned this earlier about the opportunity to work with new creatives, new writers, new ideas. Well, as we think about content moving out of lockdown and hopefully a pandemic-free world one day, how do we ensure that content is relevant to young people who are dealing with an awful lot at the moment? We've got Black Lives Matter, we've got climate change. These are all really, really important subjects to our young people. But how do we make sure that the content that we're producing represents all of those views? I'm going to ask Camilla, because you brought that up in the beginning. What do you think we can do moving forward?
I think it's a really valid question, because I think that children, have had a lot of time to think about these things, and it is potentially, quite worrying and anxiety inducing. And I think, we have a big responsibility to try and produce content that is uplifting and reassuring without being, without glossing over things. And that is quite a difficult balance to strike, I think. But I also think it's very important there's no normal anymore. There's no, things have changed so much that I think it's a really good opportunity for producers and creatives and broadcasters and commissioners to take risks and to try new types of storytelling with new types of storytellers. And we've been doing a bit of sort of tentative early development on some projects with some people that haven't necessarily directed things before. We're talking to various broadcasting partners about ideas which are quite, a bit different. We're looking at some of our high-end projects which are maybe based on existing IP, but also thinking, well, how can we bring out those themes about climate change, about the uncertain world outside, about finding reassuring stories about families, about community, about society, which we hope will go some way to not just entertaining families, but also reassuring them, because I think it is quite an anxious time for small children. And I think it's our job as creative people to do the best we can to keep them informed, but also to keep them reassured.
Thank you. Do you think there's an opportunity as well to maybe, start producing more content for perhaps older kids and addressing their concerns? As a content creator, Alistair, what do you think?
It's great to be having the conversation about diversity and inclusion. I've had some conversations with my two young daughters that I didn't expect to have this summer around lots of subjects, no less some of the things we're talking about now, and Black Lives Matter. I would say, being slightly older than some of my younger colleagues, my personal view is that I can't lie, I feel a bit frustrated that we're still having some of these conversations. What I do like about this particular zeitgeist, a particular moment, is that, one thing that I've always valued about Akamar is that we've always had a collegiate way and a collaborative way of creating content. The entire process we use there, we're encouraged to ask some of those strange questions. We have outside collaborations with educationalists and speech experts, and the writing cohort is a group of people. So I think that's a little bit into our DNA, Akamar. Having said that, we're still having ongoing conversations now about how to improve that further. And one thing I do like about this current zeitgeist is the conversation that's going on. It feels like it's taken root in a way which I perhaps haven't seen before. I would encourage other production companies regardless of what you've done in the past, just continue to challenge yourself. We're all guilty of having our own unconscious biases. To my mind, diversity, not just in the conversation, but in the means of production, in leadership positions, those sorts of things will bring about change. So I would just encourage people to keep having those conversations. I personally feel very positive about the opportunity to continue to affect change. And I agree with a lot of the points that Camilla made. And certainly at Akamar, these themes of inclusion and diversity aren't new, but it feels like there's an extra opportunity to grab that banner with a bit more energy than usual and to continue to push forward.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Sarah, from a public service broadcaster point of view, what do you think is how's the conversation going at the BBC?
Well, I think it's been very well publicised, so I think you'll all have a basic awareness of how it's going at the BBC. Authenticity, which I think is the key word here, has been something we've been trying to work towards for quite a long time. If you only draw from a narrow group, creators and artists can get certain ideas repeated over and over. So we just need to widen the pool just to make the content rich, more vibrant, more diverse. I mean, that just has to happen. But now I think it's moved on, which Alistair's alluded to in a more practical way into, all right, it's all right talking about it, but what are we going to do about it now? How are we actually going to affect change? And you will see, moving on from Cheryl's announcement earlier in the week, that we'll be looking at really positive, structured ways that we can get involved with schemes, that we can help animation studios find the right writers, maybe build mentoring schemes, and certainly work much more closely as an entire organisation across BBC Children's on finding diverse writers for animation. We always did quite a lot of work. I was running schemes in live action before I left a few years ago. But animation specific writers, I think that's something we need to really look at. So that's where we'll be focusing our attention. I mean, I'm going to just throw in another anecdote here because it still interests me, and it's not particularly UK companies, but elsewhere in the world. This authenticity must spread into every element of what we're doing. A representation has to be accurate, and that is going to reflect in voices as well and voice casting. And I'm still quite surprised in a world where Hank Azaria has apologized and won't do Apu's voice anymore because he understands why it's offensive, when we are presented largely for swing a white, very talented voiceover artist who they're going to expect to cover different ethnicities. We can't cope with that anymore. We can't support it. And I'm aware that that will involve greater planning. And I have to say, planning is something that is unique to animation. Great planning, it's really good at that, but it will need planning up front. You can't just get somebody who happens to be standing around to do a voice on the day and expect it to fly. I think with any platform, major platform in the world, the way things are.
Agree, absolutely agree. It just takes better planning and looking for the voices, looking for the artists. They are out there. Chris, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I think it's been covered quite well, but just to reiterate, Nickelodeon's mission has always been to be a home to all kids. Representation and diversity is an essential part of everything we do. For us, it is, and it always has been, important that kids see themselves reflected on screen. Today's kids are the most diverse generation ever. They demand acceptance, where earlier generations were taught to expect tolerance, more inclusive because of their millennial parents. So our content is relevant to what's happening in the world. So our programming is current and engaging. Across our kids network globally, just after lockdown, we ran the campaign Kids Together, which was complementary to the Viacom CBS campaign Alone Together. And you'll have seen some great content in our schedules created in response to recent news events, such as the Nick News special, which was Kids Race and Unity, and our renewal of the Nickelodeon Declaration of Kids' Rights. Our stories and characters are all grounded in the realities of many modern families. Families defined in so many ways, and everyone's experiences are a little different. So the world is wide open with possibility when we're telling stories about families in our shows. And as we develop the stories and characters, we're always staying authentic to the show. We've got a strong history of consciously defining the conventional wisdom of what kinds of characters and stories we represent in our shows. For example, Dora is a Latino heroine. Nella is a biracial princess and knight. And in Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, we introduced a black April O'Neil. And of course, we have a big family of 11 siblings with same-sex parents in the Loud House. We are developing great content for 6 to 12-year-olds. Really excited about it. We've got shows in development in Brazil, South Korea, China, and we're working with a couple of Brits on their first show, which is going to be great. We've always offered mixed genre content across all our platforms, but a quick look at all the platforms available to all audiences suggests that there is quite a lot of animation catering for many different interests and tastes.
Thank you, Chris. I mean, let's move the conversation on to investment, because all of these new ideas, these new opportunities are going to cost. And I know we're in a pandemic, but we can't forget that Brexit has also happened shortly before this all kicked off. And we don't know what the situation is going to be as far as funding from Creative Europe is concerned. So, Kate, what's the latest?
Oh, okay. God, I really wanted to get in on some of those other topics as well, but I won't.
Sorry.
No. It's completely right. The studios and experts should be speaking to that issue. Apart from on diversity of voice and content, it also is important that we have diversity of workforce of artists and writers. And I know you've all said that. And all sorts of schemes are now blossoming up. But I can't help feel like Alistair that this has been 20 years of my life when broadcasters and production companies and studios have been saying, got to do more. And it's not just diversity and representation, it's equality, diversity and inclusivity. And those are very important words because they're systemic issues. And this goes right back to our education system, right back to the accessibility and development of artistic and creative aspiration, and I know we can't solve that. We can't solve that, and it's a huge and another issue. But I do think sometimes there's been sticking plasters put on that issue, and then wave after wave of lovely initiatives. And I think it's time, it's beyond time that we actually got to grasp some of those systemic issues that affect animation as well as other industries in the screen industry. Right, investment. Yeah, that's what we're primarily here to do, to lobby and be around the right tables for investment. And it's worth saying that a lot has happened that's really positive. I'm sounding very Pollyanna-ish this morning. We lobbied for and got the BFI's Animated Shorts Fund launched last year. We were one of the few organisations who didn't sit on the fence in terms of the Young Audience Content Fund. We were very keen that which of course is a fantastic vehicle for new voices and PSB content, and has delivered already a range of, Jackie and her team have delivered a range of great announcements for animation. But the Brexit word has been on our minds now for too long. And in January, before, as Chris said earlier, when we thought we were dealing with the latest crisis for withdrawal from Creative Europe funding, which our sector so completely relies on in terms of co-production and our relationship with Europe, because animation requires that tapestry of quite complicated financing more than any other sector. So, we were disproportionately reliant on that funding. So we in January, I found myself writing to everyone, ministers and prime ministers, and all the new team that were joyously celebrating our exit from Brexit at the end of our Brexit at the end of January. And the worst thing happened. We withdrew. Now I've got relatively good news to say, but it's not official yet. But there is now quite detailed and meaningful talks about replacing that funding. So Creative Europe funding, which we've withdrawn from, will be replaced and hopefully announced this summer. If not this summer, certainly by the autumn budget. I'm reliably informed, and it will be called the Global Screen Fund, and it will be a UK fund for people to use in the same way as they have in the past with Creative Europe, creative media funding. So for co-productions and exhibition and distribution and events and so on and so forth, it's bound to not be enough, but it's a good start. And we're pleased. We're pleased that that lobby and being around the right tables has made that change. So that's good. But we've got to do so much more. I mean, the investment in animation as a business. I mentioned that B word earlier, the other B word, because content is everything, but it's just the start of the business. And so we want our businesses to flourish, and our businesses have a long cycle, obviously, of realizing downstream revenue. But when, and Alistair and Camilla and many others understand this far better than I do. But once that, that brilliant content is translated into licensing and merchandising and so on and so forth, it creates business, it creates sustainability, it creates an ability for our studios to reinvest and develop. And that's what we want. That's what we want, and that's what we need to secure. So to do that, we're looking at ways in which we can explain to private investors just how insanely reliable and brilliant our animation sector is. We want to be competitive as well. We need to be right up there with our competitors in terms of tax breaks, and we're doing a lot of work on that, and making headway on that as well. But we've hit a undeniably choppy time in terms of global finances as well as UK finances, and understand the government has priorities. So investment's key, and investment from broadcasters, in particular, has been announced to be reducing. And so we need to, address that head on. We think animation can take up slots for all sorts of age groups and genres, and isn't too expensive or taking too long. So we'd like to have those conversations with the PSPs, but we're very thrilled, obviously, at the new investment that's coming through from other platforms and the SVODs and AVODs and so on. So there's a lot to be optimistic about as well. So yeah, we're working hard to create that business context. We're making some wins. We already have. And we work very closely with Animation Europe and other partners internationally, because this is a global industry and we're in it. And we will succeed. But we need that support from the people who commission, and especially those that can invest in our UK studios.
Just a little question on that. Given that we've been actually really quite a resilient industry, do you think there is a danger that we may drop down the list of priority for government? Or could we be seen as that resilience could be seen as something positive, and therefore something that should, this is an industry that could actually pick up again really quickly and expand, and is therefore worth investing in? You might not be able to answer that question, but what's your kind of feeling from government?
I think, firstly, I think it's an absolutely fantastic question. I mean that genuinely, because we work in the screen industries, and a lot of the screen industries have suffered, hugely. Camilla mentioned earlier, people she knows and there's been shutdown and lockdown, and we're a booming screen industry here in the UK up until COVID. So yes, you would want the government to see that in the midst of what is bound to be a complete shakedown, some industries will not, some companies in other industries will not survive. There will have to be a review about some of those major opportunities for young people to work in other industries. And animation is an industry that has this growth potential that lots of young people don't, going back to the diversity point, don't think they can work in, but they can, and it's growing. And we're making. I'm on Zoom calls most days with government type representatives, and yesterday we were talking, there was a lot of talk about how many people are going to be made redundant in other industries, how many people are still not working and not being paid as freelancers in other industries, in the screen industry. And I'm in a position where I'm saying our studios are reporting they're taking on new people, 150 new people taken on by one studio yesterday, new business, not just for kids content, but for advertising and corporate. So there is a danger that the government thinks, yes, we're okay, but we're only okay if we are competitive in an international, global marketplace. And at the moment, we're not. At the moment, we could do better. And we could do more and grow more and take on more people. And that's what our ambition is. And I think the government, that's a really long answer, but I think the government is listening to that message.
Thank you. I would love to continue this conversation for like hours, and I'm sure we could, but I'm gonna have to move it on to Q&A from our audience out there. I am told there are people watching this. So if you haven't already asked your question, you can do so by using the little red heart in the top right of your screen, apparently. I'm going to take first question from Jude Spencer of Media Mental Health Trainer. I have just watched your perspective on before I jumped onto this. A very good perspective on frame of mind. It's all about mental health and looking after yourself through this lockdown. She says, "Hi all, thanks for this great panel. Remote working has a greater risk of depression and anxiety due to greater isolation, particularly for those who live alone. That doesn't account for the crisis we found ourselves in during the last few months. How are you supporting your teams through this change now and going forward?" Who wants to take that one?
I can
Camilla?
say,
Or Alistair, go for it.
so just briefly, I think it's a really important question to raise. I would say, as far as ACMA are concerned, in addition to the normal routines and Zoom calls that everyone's set up now, just on a personal level, I've had a couple of dozen conversations with colleagues who work from HR to talk about just these types of things, unsolicited calls, just to make sure we're all checking in for each other, etc. I think that is really, really important. It's more than just do you have the right screen set up and the right equipment, especially during this strangest of summers. There's an opportunity to talk a little bit more about how you're doing, how you're feeling. And it is something that we have worked hard to address at Akamar. And I think it's really important that you do connect with your staff like that. We are relatively small, around 60 odd people. I'm not sure how that might work at a larger corporation. Perhaps Sarah's got some insight on that. But from a smaller production company like Akamar Films, it's certainly pretty high on our list of priorities.
How are the bigger corporations dealing with potential mental health issues? Sarah, any?
Well, so on a macro level, there's how you work with your own teams and ensure that they're feeling happy and confident and that you're addressing issues as they arrive, because this is a very different set of circumstances. We touched on it before we came onto this session, in that it doesn't affect everybody in the same way, and that has to be accommodated, and we have to listen to people and make sure we're open. But across the BBC, they've been very careful to put robust schemes in place where you can access staff support on a number of different levels. The BBC is generally very good at providing mental health support, amongst a range of other things that they would support their staff freelancers through. But they've been very specific in making sure that everybody knows exactly where they can get this help and support and advice, what's available and how to access it. But I think we're very lucky. That's hardwired into what we do as a workforce.
I think the
Does anyone want to add anything? Yep, Chris?
CBS, they've been absolutely phenomenal. From the moment we were told we were all going to work from home, communication has been incredible. We are fortunate that as part of a larger organisation, we are able to access a whole host of resources. I think the communication specifically to my team from the head, from Dave Lynn, and from the other heads has been just tremendous, and the support is just there if we need it. And what is great is that they're thinking long term, and they're not thinking just about the government advice. They're obviously taking the government advice into consideration, but they're planning accordingly for the needs of the employees. So I think the return to work, when we do return to work, it's going to be done with dignity and grace, and certainly investing in the people in an onward basis.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I suppose I'd just add that we're actually quite a small company, and so we are able to all get on a weekly Zoom call together and talk about what we're all up to. But I also think that we've tried as much as possible to remember those things that you naturally do when you're all in the studio together, such as have a drink on a Friday night, or have a birthday celebration, even if it's on Zoom, or remember to send someone flowers, or if somebody's, we've got a couple of people who've got children and who are young enough that they're having to juggle childcare and working with their partners, and just trying to give them flexible working hours where they maybe do half a day and their partner has the kids for the other half, for that half of the day, and then they swap. And just trying to be flexible and mindful that everybody's situation is slightly different. And, people who are living alone under lockdown, just remembering to check in and have the personal touch, I think, is important.
Yeah. That leads us actually quite nicely on to a question we've got from Howard Reed, a writer, who says, as a writer, I have felt more connected to the productions I'm working on than when meetings were in person. I've heard that from others as well, but much more infrequent. Is there an appetite among the panel for continuing some of the structures of remote working that COVID has put in place once it has passed?
I think there
Think
is.
about that.
Yeah, I think there is. I think
Yeah.
some of the, for quite a lot of people, the daily commute is something that they're worried about, because it's always taken a lot, in London. If you live in London and work in London, it's always usually takes you quite a long time to get to work. And now, obviously, with social distancing measures, that's going to be even more difficult. And then, obviously, if anyone's got underlying health conditions, or they have people in their extended family and friends bubble that have health conditions, that's quite anxious making. So we're looking at different ways of, potentially having more working from home going into the future, and not necessarily going back to the old model of everybody in 5 days a week in the studio. I think that it's really proved that, we can be flexible and we can mix and match a bit, and, stay in touch regardless of whether we're in the same room. I still think there is some value in being together. I think that if we weren't together at all, sometimes you miss out on some of the things that around the sort of social aspect of work, and also the ability to very quickly check in on a creative basis if you want to ask questions of your director or your head of department. But I do think that we're never going to go back to being the same again. I think we're all going to be much more flexible about our working systems in future.
Yeah.
Can I talk
I was
specifically
talking-
about
sorry.
writers here? Because, hi Howard, I've heard the same thing, that writers are really getting some value from this, because it does move us towards potentially being able to have some kind of quasi room, which is one of the bars to entry on writing we have in the UK. We don't have writers' rooms like they have in the US. And I'm hearing that people are finding it easier to organise. It's making it much more cost effective. You can now get all your writers in one place and they can all talk. And that will help us with the content at the older end that we just touched on earlier. When we're trying to reach older kids, they're looking for smart, savvy writing that they've seen on their favourite shows from the US. And this will help us go some way, I think, to achieve a similar effect. If everybody can talk, it just really lends itself to it. So I'm very excited to see what we can deliver. Also, by bringing in wider voices, because we can bring in people from different parts of the world. There's all sorts of interesting things we can do around this. And for certain, it won't be changed for practicalities. It will be changed because this is a really good idea, particularly in that sector, the writing sector.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to say there's Sorry, Beth, I was going to say that point that Sarah's making about actually the creative benefits, notwithstanding Camilla's good points, there's definitely a need for people to, creatively get together at some point. But this can touch on all the other points as well. Like, we are fairly geographically spread as a sector. We're not all based in London, but there's a big cluster in London. It's expensive to live in London. If we want to be truly inclusive and diverse, having people able to work in the animation for an animation studio based in London, but actually working from anywhere in the country is great for that diversity and inclusivity point. I know one studio who's just done a survey with their employees, asking them where they want to live, and the response they got was Bristol, Brighton, Barcelona, and they said, why not? After this finishes, why not? Because if we can make this work, why not? It might even solve some of the Brexit drain of talent problems as well. Which is again a whole other topic. But this could have huge benefits, and I love that point that Sarah and Howard are making in terms of, actually it could give a real spark to creativity as well. There's a different way of working it.
Yeah. I just wanted to highlight there is a whole discussion on Life After Lockdown, was the final webinar, which are all available on the CMC YouTube channel. The one that Animated Women did on the 26th of June, there is a whole hour-long discussion about the pros and cons of working from home, not working from home. I want to pick up a final question before we close from Sam at E1, who says, excellent panel discussion. We heard Sarah discuss that the BBC will be setting up diverse schemes to find diverse writers, animators, and voice casting. Do any of the other people on the calls, brands, have plans to do anything similar, or have anything in place to reflect further representation in the animation industry? Before you ask that, there was another similar question from a writer asking about how BAME authors find opportunities within studios to try out for projects. Are they kind of the same question? Who wants to answer that?
I'll go first. So look, we have our short program, which we launched in 2013, where we look to work with early career creatives through that route. We're currently putting our plans in place for next year's program, where we will place a renewed emphasis on early career fledgling creators. We've also run our Nick International Writers Program, which mentored new writers of all backgrounds and gave them experience in writing rooms. And we're looking into what opportunities we can open up in other departments to nurture talent in broader fields. Also, just to add to the point earlier, we have outreach by sheer geography. We're able to work with our channels on the ground to develop new ideas and unearth new talent. And we're hoping that we could perhaps mentor other early career creatives and creators from different backgrounds and partner them up with talent from the US and the UK.
Thank you.
If I could, after you, Camilla.
I just on a couple of specific areas. I mean, we've had some real success working with Creative Access, and we've had some wonderful crew members that we've been able to recruit via that scheme, who we've then kept on afterwards. And in some cases, they've moved on from us to other companies and had very successful careers. And in some cases, they've stayed with us and are valuable members of the team who've worked up through the system and taken on more and more responsibility. We're currently we're just starting a production now with BFI support, and we're going to be involved in something called Step Up, which is a great scheme that the BFI have launched, which is going to be to help production companies give opportunities for people from diverse backgrounds to step up to a role that they might not otherwise have a chance to do. So we're really excited about that. And then on a more general basis, we're always looking for talent, whether it's writers, directors, animators, and we've got a couple of specific projects which I can't tell you about at the moment because they're in very early stage development, where we're actively seeking creative talent across all the roles, but in particular writers and directors. from a diverse range of backgrounds. So it's something that we're very conscious of and we're very keen to do more of.
Thank you. Alistair, you've literally got 1 minute and then we're going to have to close, I'm afraid.
We had a launch of Being at the Cinema last year at the IMAX, and I'm pleased to say that when you get to see the voices, the talent there, we already have a wide range of talent from diverse backgrounds. Within Akamar itself, we have got an ongoing diversity and inclusion panel, which is looking at trying to create a whole range of progressive innovations, which I hope will include also opportunities for people from BAME backgrounds to come and actually get some practical experience and actually potentially get paid for that as well. It's difficult, especially in these economic circumstances.
Yeah.
I'm really buoyed by hearing other people talking about leaning into this and providing more opportunities. I think it's in the production side of things is where we need to make the most difference.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you to everybody today for your very insightful points. We can continue this conversation for another 30 minutes in back chat, where I think most of the speakers will be able to get in, at least some of them. That is now open. Just click on the chat button next to the heart button that you use to send your questions. There are lots of videos of interest to the animation community on the VOD section of the conference. One title stands out rather obviously, that's Perspective on the Golden Rules for Creating Great Kids Cartoons. I watched that the other day, it is very insightful. Based on some of the issues we've been discussing today, another perspective on which I watched this morning and again is very good, it has the title Our Frame of Mind, and it's full of advice for maintaining mental health in the workplace, or anywhere else for that matter. Remember, you can find all the conference info you need on the CMC app, sponsored by S4C, on the CMC website, and here on the conference platform. The next and penultimate webinar will be at 2 p.m. today, and it's a Nordic smorgasbord that looks at two great and long-lived brands loved by kids all over the world. That's Moomins, now a successful new animated series, Moomin Valley, and Pippi Longstocking, about to become a feature film. Former CMC keynote speaker, writer Frank Cottrell-Boyce is in the chair for what promises to be an amazing session. Don't forget your herrings. Thank you everybody for joining us today. See you in the back chat. Thank you.